Marketing Today is sponsored by Lightmatter. Have you ever wondered how fast growth companies seem to build top-notch software applications so quickly? Or have you ever struggled to get your own company's UX and app to deliver the awesome customer experience you were going for? Yeah, I've been there. That's where Lightmatter comes in. Lightmatter acts as a direct extension of design and development teams at some of the world's top companies. Whether your company needs a website or an app, they can help. The New York Times, Bloomberg, Code Academy, McCann, and dozens of others already trust them. Check them out at lightmatter.com. That's LIGHTMATTER.com. Tell them Alan sent you.
For all of us, it's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today. Today on the show, I've got Joseph Jaffe. He's a multiple author, serial entrepreneur, a sought-after consultant, speaker, and thought leader on marketing, innovation, and change. And today we talk about his latest book, Built to Suck: The Inevitable Demise of the Corporation and How to Save It? ? So today we have a quite a wide-ranging conversation about the principles of how corporations are driving towards suckage, so to speak, and how to prevent it, and examples as we go. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Joseph Jaffe. Well, Joseph, welcome to the show.
I am really glad to be on a marketing podcast. I love all of the marketing podcasts that are out there, especially this one. And, it's great to talk marketing.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a lot of fun, I think. You're somebody I've actually followed for a good part of your career, way back when you had Crayon, and I can't remember, you had a co-conspirator at that point in time, but I was following him as well. Anyway.
Maybe it was someone like C.C. Chapman, or there was Sharon Neville. We actually,
Yes.
when we launched the business, we had a little bit of a monopoly on thought leadership in the certainly in the nascent podcasting days, but also marketing and PR. Yeah, we had a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it was some interesting work you guys were doing. So, well, let's start with your background and your career. Where did you start, and how'd you get to the HMS Beagle? And I want to know about the name as well, but I'll start with, where did you start?
Well, I'm from. The old joke is that this is not a Staten Island accent, which I'm sure you figured out by now. So I'm from South Africa originally. I studied marketing. I double majored in marketing, and actually maybe even triple majored marketing research, and business statistics at the University of Cape Town. But I got a job working for a funky fast food company. More, I suppose we would have called it then a QSR, a quick service restaurant, called Nando's Chicken Land. And the way I describe them is kind of Starbucks meets subservient chicken on crack. So, you had a premium priced experiential brand, really known for great service and customer experience, with incredibly provocative, irreverent, and identity, I would say kind of identity strong marketing communications. And why I say identity strong is, most companies don't know who they are. They have no spine, no backbone. They're searching for purpose, and they blow whichever way the wind blows, as opposed to standing for something and being secure, in who they were. As a case in point, Nando's, which was flame grilled, butterfly cut, spicy, or peri peri chicken, they would say things like, their customer service poster would say, "Did we make a cluck up?" Or, they even had a line when you went in that said, "Our quality is remembered long after the wait is forgotten." So they were really able to kind of embrace who they were. So fast forward, I worked there for about 5 years, came to the US 22 years ago, worked for a number of Madison Avenue agencies, although I say don't hold that against me. But I was able to escape. And I've been consulting now since 2002. In that course, I've written 5 books and started 3 companies. So first being Crayon, second being Evolution. And in keeping with the theme, I started HMS Beagle about a year ago with the former CEO of J. Walter Thompson, Lynn Power. And The name comes from a ship which sailed 200 years ago from the UK to the Galapagos Islands, carrying one Charles Darwin. And so the theme of evolution, sustained, but more importantly, Darwin said, it's not the strongest of species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but rather the one that is the most adaptable to change. And I really think that that has become the common theme. When we talk about digital and we talk about social and we talk about innovation and startups, at the end of the day, if you had to try and find one common thread and line that runs right through it, it would be the ability to change and to adapt and therefore to evolve. And that is really what separates the winners from the losers. And so what the HMS Beagle is, our mission is to help our clients navigate this journey to survival, because we believe everyone, and I mean everyone, is in the survival business nowadays. So that's kind of the career, this squiggly line that led me to here.
Well, I love this. I love the source of the name for one, the ship that carried Darwin. I guess I should also say congrats on the latest book, Built to Suck. And
thank you.
So tell us a little bit about why this book and why now.
Every book that I've written, I think, is almost like another chapter of a bigger story. There are common themes throughout the books as well, which is, again, change, creativity, innovation, and optimization. So from Life After the 30-Second Spot, it was, robbing Peter to pay Paul, moving money from television, radio, and print to digital, enjoying the conversation, moving money from communication to conversation, flip the funnel from acquisition to retention. Zero, which I co-authored with Martin Albarda, who was my former InBev client and Coke client, was about really moving money from paid media to no media. And then comes Built to Suck. And you know what? I thought of a whole bunch of other ideas. I wanted to really focus on startups. I wanted to focus on shopper marketing, because I just felt like at the end of the day, everything around that moment of truth is kind of BS, except for the moment when a shopper walks into a store and chooses a product or a brand. But I think with the 4 books that came, before this one, in some cases I was almost too far ahead. I was ahead in a bad way. It's not a compliment; it's an insult. I was a little too far ahead when I wrote Life After the 30-Second Spot. I identified 10 bold approaches. One of them was consumer-generated content. One of them was what I called communal marketing, which actually became known as social media. I think the point about that is in 2004, Facebook and YouTube didn't exist yet. So Nick Bryan once said to me, and he runs now Dentsu, he said, there are 2 types of people, pioneers and settlers. The pioneers get shot and the settlers take the land. And then he called me a pioneer. And I was like, thanks, I think, So Built to Suck, I think, is an idea and a message whose time has come. I think I'm in the exact right place at the right time. And it is a warning. It is a warning and a challenge to corporations that the corporate era is coming to an end, coming to a close. That, if companies were a civilization, like every other civilization that has come before it, it has risen and it has fallen. And it generally fell on the basis of complacency, hubris, inability to change, adapt, evolve. So I felt like I needed to write this book because I'm a marketer. I believe in marketing. I believe in the power of creativity and innovation, but we're not seeing it at any level, for the most part, from any company or brand or any industry. And there's a bigger point as well. Even the best, we've heard things like Lee Clow would say, the problem is not bad. The problem is not advertising; it's bad advertising. And I don't agree with that statement at all, because when there's so much crap around you, the good advertising can't survive, can't break through, because there's just too much noise. So there is a bigger and a pressing challenge, and the challenge is the failing of corporations, of business models and revenue streams. So, the 2 points that I would kind of like conclude with is, number one, marketing has to get better, and really, really better, really fast. And number two is, even with marketing just outperforming itself, it still may not be enough for the corporation. So I'll kind of leave that hanging there, and I'm sure we'll come back to that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And on the show, we've had across a number of different guests on, from people like Phil Kotler to Seth Godin late last year, and it's come up in other conversations as well. But this notion of what you hit on a little bit about societies and structures failing over time, right? And I think with Kotler and with Godin, we hit on democracy and capitalism as having some tarnish on them and maybe some chinks in the system. And I think as a result of that, obviously, we've also talked about with other guests on some good folks like Bob Hoffman and Mark Ritson about the feedback loops to corporations and how corporations have gotten so big that they're just not listening anymore and adapting, to your point. And I think this is a great conversation to have about. I know we're going to get into it and talk about not only the flaws, but also some of the areas that you identify that can help. So one of the things, the premise, I guess the original premise you start out the book is talking about the size of a corporation in itself, and that it is a strength. These are my words, by the way, but it's a strength until it's a weakness. And I'm curious if this is true in all categories that you've thought about.
So I'm trying to think where is a good place. I want to go back a little bit to what you were saying as well, because I'm actually I've also been very impressed with this common thread right now, which are not just marketing leaders but business leaders not rallying against capitalism, but recognizing that capitalism itself needs to evolve. And it's very, very pertinent and relevant right now, coming into what will be yet another historic US election where one side is being painted as being as socialist. And it's just a positioning exercise at the end of the day. I mean, I find the marketing of politics, by the way, beyond fascinating. But this need that actually says we need to actually evolve our very business model. I'm sure, everybody has seen this until the cows come home, that quote that says, Uber, the world's largest transportation company, owns no vehicles. Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider, owns no rooms, yada, yada, yada. And at the time, it really kind of connected with people, because none of these businesses actually had big physical, durable products. They were all dealing in intangibles where actually their customers were the product. And that contrasts so starkly with all of these other companies, with all of these resources and overhead. The overhead overhead in of itself has become this cement block that is kind of dragging us down to the bottom of the ocean. So I love the conversation, because it's certainly consistent with what we've been talking about even up until now, which is this idea of change and evolution and adaptation. But it also talks about a soul and conscience. And I was really fascinated by a company, I still am. There's a company which I'm sure you've heard of called Brandless. And Brandless sells one product per SKU, essentially, whether it's toothpaste, whether it's detergent, whether it's coffee, and it charges $3 per SKU, per product. And the reason it actually says, one of the FAQs is, how can we charge $3 per product regardless? And they talk about by eliminating the brand tax, the tax associated with marketing, advertising, branding, the very nature of what it is to actually, we were all taught, if you brand well, even in Kotler's textbook,
right,
if you brand well and do your jobs really well, you can command a premium for your product because of that brand equity that now offers people, some reassurance, or or consistency of quality, etc., buying into the same experience. So the essence of the hypothesis here is that, to kind of reframe what you just said, or not reframe, but just kind of paraphrase it,
Right.
the very thing that helped these companies grow, which was size, scale, economies of scale, efficiencies and cost efficiencies of having a global footprint and global network, and all of these resources which could then be shared and synchronized and synergized, is now the very thing that is the albatross around its neck, because these corporations are too big, too slow, too siloed, too political, too dysfunctional, and they've essentially lost their competitive edge. And for all those reasons, how on earth would you expect one of those large legacy companies to survive and thrive when they're existing right now during what I call the fifth industrial revolution, the entrepreneurial revolution, the rise of DTC?
Mm.
We're not seeing any indicators that suggest that any of this will be a fly by night or a fad. And by the way, there was another reason why I even wanted to write this book, because I didn't want this to be about technology or even technology itself. I wanted to elevate it to say, listen, if the corporation dies, then everybody dies with it, including the CMO, including marketing, including all the agencies. So unless we all recognize that we're all in this together, we will go down with the ship, or like the rats we are, will be the first to flee the sinking ship.
Right. No, it's very true. It's very true. Oh, and just to put an extra fine point on this notion, we've talked about marketers. We are marketers. I think you would say that you're a marketer as well, at least in some part. And we've had these other folks on this show, but to underline it, I mean, one of the world's most successful financiers and monitor of the markets, Ray Dalio, has been talking about this notion as well, and the fundamental flaws that we may need to fix in our society, and the capitalism being one of them, and especially in the U.S. for sure.
Yeah, and I had this amazing conversation with Philip Kotler as well.
Yeah,
and he was very kind to he read the book, he endorsed it. I haven't released that interview yet. I just haven't had time. But one of the best parts of this conversation was, I said, your 4Ps and also segmenting, targeting, positioning, I've kind of tried to like turn them all on their head and reinvent them or kind of, or take them to the next level. And rather than saying, how dare you, you little piece of, son of, he turned around and said, good. He said, it's about time somebody took what I created and ran with it and turned it into something better. And what struck me with this brilliant man who is a role model and a mentor is he is still learning and changing and evolving. But yeah. I just loved this whole focus on this idea that says capitalism itself. And by the way, this whole conversation is not necessarily about corporate citizenship, which is one of the 4 pillars, which I know we'll get to. But I think it demonstrates that if we want to be strategic planners, and if we truly want to reinvent and reinvigorate marketing, a marketing renaissance, we have to be business subject matter experts too. We have to plug ourselves into the very longevity and growth engine of corporations, and not just talk about clicks, and not just talk about quarterly earnings, and not just talk about this thing called ROI, which really is not even. That's another rant I could go on, and I won't, but it should be called ROE, return on expenses, because our marketing budget is nothing more and looked at nothing more as an expense. So if we can elevate all of this to the board, or at a boardroom level, that's where we start to kind of turn lead into gold.
I like it. Well, we've been talking a little bit about size and a number of other areas. You also lay out age, the nature of public ownership, and culture as other drivers of what creates built to suck. Can you just describe what you mean by the age, public ownership, and culture?
Yeah, so the first thing is, we've established this idea, Jay Scheidt once said, let's see how big we get before we suck, which was the inspiration. Companies are not built to last, Jim Collins, but built to suck. But then a lot of people, as I was writing the book, they started saying, well, what about Facebook? What about Google? What about Amazon? Do they suck? And my answer was twofold. One, no, but they will. If they don't now, they will. And two is Facebook already sucks. So I almost drew a line, a very arbitrary, subjective line, which I thought was kind of appropriate at the millennial, the cutoff at the millennial, the birth of the millennial generation, 1980. So any company born after 1980 has a stay of execution. But, jumping all the way, and I know we'll cover this too, when Jeff Bezos, when Amazon awarded their 2 headquarters, he called an all-hands meeting and he said to every one of his employees, one day we will fail. One day we will go out of business, and your job is to delay that for as long as possible. So age is a factor. And if you think about it, you go into the boardrooms of these legacy corporations that are older than 100 years, and you see this big mahogany boardroom table, and you see a beautiful, massive oil painting of an old dead white guy with a gold plaque, and then you see their mission statement to be the leaders and for 120 proud years, and you just see that they're living in the past.
Right.
And so that's age. The third one is being a public company. I mean, that is the kiss of death. That's why Eric Reynolds, who's at Clorox, he said that corporations suffer from short-termitis. I call it a CTD, which is a corporate transmitted disease, and it's chronic, unfortunately. The minute that you are beholden to a bunch of outsider, money-loving and money-grubbing shareholders, you're not in control of your own fate anymore. And, I kind of posit that that's why Elon Musk had a bit of a nervous breakdown wanting to take his company private again, because nobody likes to be told what to do, especially if you're a visionary. And then the fourth one is culture, because, it's just apparent that if the company culture does not embrace change and failure and risk and collaboration and collective consciousness, etc., all of this change is just going to be short-lived and nothing more than lip service or superficial. So these are what I call the 4 horsemen of the corporate apocalypse. And and if you go to any large company, they're going to be 0 for 4 or 4 for 4, depending on how you want to look at it. But with all of these horsemen approaching, I'm not really sure how a corporation is going to be able to withstand the rate and the nature of disruption and demise.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't, you mentioned this already, but the Bezos day one philosophy, I had not seen that until I was reading the book. And it made me kind of take a step back, because I was like, wow, what it hit me at first. One, your book is largely in line with some of those themes. But I was curious. I mean, we don't have Bezos on here today, but maybe we can get him. What foresight, I guess, for somebody that's starting a company or that has started a company, and a highly successful one from all intents purposes from the outside looking in, to have that kind of day one philosophy. How did that shape your approach to this book?
The funny thing is, and I can only say, please believe me when I tell you this is true. I only discovered, first of all, the quote. I mean, that I can prove, because it literally came out about 2 or 3 weeks before the book went to print. And I scrambled to incorporate it, because I felt like the ultimate validation for this book, if I even needed it, which I didn't, was that quote. But another thing that I found out is, in this famous day one memo to shareholders, he also spoke about customer obsession. He used the phrase customer obsession. And another thing where I have to tell you, just take my word for it, when I created customer obsession as one of the pillars, I actually didn't know where the term had been used before. So it was like, for me, also validation to see that Jeff Bezos, who truly is a visionary, kind of using this term. So from day one, they were focused on this. He somehow, maybe he's a time traveler and he read this book. I don't know. No, but he clearly understood that a corporation, no matter how big they got, had to never forget where they'd come from. Always embrace their roots, those humble beginnings. For him, he represented it through this notion of day one. The moment it becomes day two in your organization, you're already on the downward decline or death spiral. And also customer obsession. Remember, it was Jeff Bezos who did something that I wrote about probably in book number 2, which was he cut his television spend to zero. And the quote was, I'm taking this money and I'm going to invest it in my customers in the form of free shipping. So free shipping becomes what I call the Amazon moments. And when I'm doing workshops or with marketers, I always say to them, what is your Amazon moment? What is your defining moment that you own, that only you could own, that you were first, that really set you apart? And it was free shipping, especially coming from television advertising, that set Amazon apart and started their kind of hockey stick growth curve. Today, Amazon has evolved significantly, and I think Amazon Prime represents probably that next more modern Amazon moment. Maybe this company will come up with one of them per decade, because we've certainly seen that trajectory. So it's really interesting, and I'm glad you brought it up. When you look at Amazon, to see he got it from day one, and it wasn't just a press release.
Right. Well, and we've all seen his ability, I guess, over time to counteract the public ownership piece by managing that I'm going to continue to lose money, and investors, frankly, I guess he conditioned them well enough that they just left him alone as it related to that, and the stock continued to go up. So I mean, he kind of thwarted that first public ownership threat, and then on the culture piece. One of the things I think this is attributed to him, or at least to Amazon, they have the meeting rule, these anecdotes of never have a meeting larger than you can serve one, I think it's maybe 1 or 2 pizzas to feed everyone that's in the room. So, just in terms of, continuing to be able to do things at speed or at scale, and to not get bogged down in the minutia of big company. Thinking.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was thinking as you were saying that losing money is the enemy, or at least the foil of short-term ROI, at least based on quarterly earnings. And it really is that simple. A business leader, a visionary that can say to their, think about those two, they are diametrically opposed. And think about all the marketers that are stuck in that kind of black hole that is short-term ROI, versus you can probably count them on one hand, that have said, stay the course. This is what we're doing. This is what we're building. This is the journey we're undertaking. And if you believe in me and trust in this vision, we'll get there. The other thing that's interesting is, one thing that also came out of, I saw Ray Dalio's interview on 60 Minutes.
60 Minutes,
they also had a different meeting. Culture is such an important part, right? So they do these live evaluations of people, which I was listening. And so I think it's, that's another, it's almost like a non-scientific litmus test. It's directional, right? Which is, look at the way that your corporation holds meetings. Are they meetings for the sake of meetings? Is the commitment objective of a meeting to get another meeting, or do you walk out with real, tangible next steps and action items? Are there people sitting in those meetings that are, and I'll try and be kind about it, but what I would call oxygen invaders? Like if people aren't talking and contributing, why the hell are they in that meeting in the first place?
Right.
So I think that is a great element within that category of culture that you brought up, that again, it's not scientific or statistically representative, but I'll bet you companies that struggle with meetings are probably more likely than not suck.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'll just add one more thing on the Ray Dalio. I don't know if you've read his book, the first book, I guess. I think there's a second one coming. I'm not sure if it's out yet, called Principles, but it's a large book. So I warn people. But in that, the meetings you describe, and he has, you probably saw as well in the 60 Minutes episode, what they call the dot collector, which is the real-time feedback of everyone in the meeting.
Yeah.
And the thing I loved about how they use that data was it became what he calls a believability weighted index. So not everyone's opinion in the room matters, it only matters based on how successful and truthful they've been over time. And that's how they start to weight their decisions. You could think about a C-suite. I mean, we've both been consultants and probably been, around the number of C-suite folks. Just think if we could do a believability weighted decision in a boardroom. I think we might have a lot of different decisions from time to time.
And I'll just kind of just put a little cherry on top, which is we've seen so many industries and business models and disrupted specifically through technology and startups. Surely we're going to see someone doing that for things like meetings, or creating a new solution and selling that through to corporations, whether it's just a philosophy or it's technology based. And that's a very rhetorical statement, because there are companies doing that. Evolution, my previous company, did quite a bit of work with Steelcase. And so we kind of looked often at the future of work and productivity. And there's some companies doing some very, very cool stuff. But for the most part, no one's even heard of them, because we're still struggling to kind of embrace these challenges or new entrants versus just feeding incumbency, which is a shame.
Right. Well, we've been talking about what's wrong with companies and how they suck. You've identified 4 pillars to delay or put off the suck, so to speak. Can you tell us about each of those?
Of course I will. And, before I even introduce these 4 pillars, I talk about this idea of embracing your heresy, which is probably the best chapter I've ever written of all 5 of my books. And it's just such a tremendously strong idea that says you have to kind of, as Rashad Tabakawala would say, you have to call out the turd on the table in order to recognize and pivot around that. And, without being able to accept or even identify a problem, companies are living in denial. And so these 4 pillars, digital disruption, talent resurrection, customer obsession, and corporate citizenship, really deal with, I think digital disruption is self-explanatory, as is customer obsession. Talent resurrection is all about employee engagement. I'll come back to that in a second. And then corporate citizenship is some very strong points of view on cause and cause-related and purpose, and companies having a soul. So I'll touch on each one very briefly. Digital disruption, the message there is, a big part of that is about collaboration with startups and entrepreneurs. But the essence of it is that we have become so predictable and so vanilla when it comes to digital. Digital always was meant to disrupt and absolutely turn business models on their heads. And I would say to companies, if you are not being truly disruptive through digital, and of course digital is digital, social, mobile, emerging technology, then you're just trying to teach an old dog old tricks, not even new tricks. The talent resurrection component is very simple. Yes, we're probably all going to be replaced by machines at some point. And we might already have been. This might be the Matrix. I don't know. But until that day happens where AI kind of takes over, we've got to, if we cannot attract and retain the best and the brightest, we're dead on arrival. And no younger, certainly, talent wants to work for these large legacy corporations anymore, or at least not the way they used to. And even if they do, they're not going to stick around for that. As I say in the book, they don't want a gold Rolex from you, maybe a gold Apple Watch, but not a gold Rolex. I also take that one step further, and I actually use this challenge, which is ban the employee. We should stop calling our talent employees. They are partners. They are guests. They are barristers. Disney has names for them. We've got to be able, team members. We've got to be able to not just embrace them culturally, but also turn them into entrepreneurs. The third element, customer obsession, I actually say we should stop using the phrase customer service, customer experience, even customer centricity. We truly have to be obsessed. And it is the one mandatory pillar, even if the other 3 are even if you totally blow the three out the water and don't deliver on customer obsession, I think failure is almost inevitable. And then finally, corporate citizenship, and I introduced a concept in the book called mirror and glass, which ironically, Jim Collins talks about mirror and glass, but in a different way, in an opposite way, but not necessarily a contradictory way. But my whole point is, if we're living in a world of glass, whether it's glass door, whether it's going to a restaurant and seeing your food being cooked through the glass. Full transparency is the only way to do business today. And everything about brands and branding and advertising is all about opacity. It's all image advertising. Brands are not real. Branding is not real. Brand advertising is not real. It is a manipulated, often photoshopped or retouched image of a utopian scenario that is not mirrored inside the company. And so that's why companies need to be able to exist in this complete, naked, and honest transparency. And there are companies that are doing things like that, whether it's CVS saying they're not going to sell cigarettes anymore, whether it's Patagonia, where they've adjusted their mission statement to indicate that their mission is to save the planet from us, right? From ourselves. We see companies, Nike, we see companies that truly have embraced glass versus mirror. And I feel that those four pillars, I mean, again, right now, if you are a marketer out there, how would you deliver against those four pillars? I'm sure I pretty much know how you score against the four horsemen, which is 0. But these four pillars are certainly, and the ability to embrace your heresy, which means, are you prepared to put yourself out of business? Are you prepared to fire yourself? What would happen if you cut your paid media to 0? I actually came up with a new one a few weeks ago, which is that there should be term limits on corporations. That when a corporation actually gets to a certain age, it has to split up or reboot or pivot or just close down. I mean, good luck trying to see the first company to do that. But then again, we've seen IBM move from Big Blue to big data, right? From mainframes to AI. So it is possible.
Right. Well, I think those four pillars, they're fascinating and thought-provoking for sure. And I know you also get very practical and provide this, what's called a survival planning canvas, as a method or a framework to start thinking about your survival as a company and a corporation. Tell us a little bit about what that is. I know it's kind of hard. This is an audio format versus a visual format, but I'd love you just to describe what it is and what it's intended to do for you.
Yeah, so for people that are familiar with within the startup world, there is the very famous lean startup or business plan canvas, and I kind of took that template and the spirit of that and developed what I call the survival planning canvas. So the survival planning canvas, in a nutshell, is designed to create a survival to thrival roadmap. And by the way, your listeners can, obviously, I hope they'll buy the book, and it's in the book. There's a survival planning canvas and then a startup a canvas. And then I've also filled it out for an overactive bladder syndrome drug called Mirbitric, and I filled it out for Budweiser. Ironically, both have P, common themes of P, I suppose, if you drink too much beer. But you can actually, your listeners can, even if they don't buy the book, they can probably, they can download it for free on builttosuck.com. Imagine that the canvas is divided into two halves. The top half is a little bit more traditional and conventional. It has a very nautical theme, which is obviously consistent with me being the admiral of the HMS Beagle. But you have headwinds and tailwinds, which is your SWOT. You have North Star, which are values, and with a different spin, because these have to be newer values that represent change and innovation, as well as legacy and roots. And then there's a 3-dimensional way to look at competitive. Most people just think of competitive either one-dimensionally. These are a competitor set. You look at those that chart that has like everyone compared with X's against criteria. You have like a two-dimensional one that sometimes uses a perceptual map, but this is a three-dimensional one that looks at what I would call incumbents, challengers, and incubators. So old guard, new guard, next guard, because it's really important to identify who is the competitor that will put you out of business, and do they even exist yet? And certainly when we think about, Dollar Shave and Harry's relative to Gillette, P&G and Gillette probably would have benefited from doing this exercise a few years back. Now, at the bottom of the fold of the page are what I call walk the plank and discover new worlds. So walk the plank literally says, are you prepared to put yourself out of business? If you were to start a competing product or brand right now, that would be a killer, that would kill your brand. What would it be? What would it look like? How would it work? And then the message there is, if that's such a good idea, why wouldn't you do it yourself? And what are the odds someone isn't doing it right now? And then on the Discover New Worlds, that breaks into two kind of exercises. One that says, if you could do it all over again, how would you start your business? Or if you had a magic wand or a limit, an unlimited checkbook, if you were running the show, what changes would you effect today, and why aren't you doing them? And then the final one is looking at all of these new business models, direct-to-consumer business models, subscription, philanthropy, what I call temporanomics, which is this idea of pay with your money or your time. If anyone's played Candy Crush or Clash of Clans, all these games, you notice that these are all billion-dollar companies now that have basically all used the same business model, which is download for free. And then if you want to gem up, or you want to, kind of get power-ups or whatever they call it, you either watch a video, so you give permission essentially it's not even interruption anymore because you elected it, or you pay. And so micropayments, I think, is another interesting business model. And so by doing this and filling out this canvas, and there are a few other supporting exercises like developing the survival instinct, it creates that roadmap to change and evolution. And, I just want to add one other thing, which is that when I say we're all in the survival business, a lot of companies get a bit scared. A lot of CMOs are kind of, I just had a CMO recently said, I've just read 4 chapters of your book and I'm fearing for my job. And I said, good. If that helps you change, that's a good thing. But survival is a gift. Every day when we wake up in the morning and we're alive, we've been given another chance to basically right the wrongs, or to finally get it right this time. And I really want companies to realize that survival it's not a right. It's not guaranteed. It is a privilege. And we have to, if we want it to be a right, we have to earn the right to survive and then thrive. It is a means to an end, and that end is thrival or growth. And so for companies to kind of be able to go on this journey, fill out this canvas, and go through this process, they have to be a little bit vulnerable, a little bit naked, a little bit honest, if not with everyone else, with themselves, that they are far from perfect, that there is a lot of change needed, and they need to change.
Awesome. Well, we have a ton of CMOs and marketing leaders listening to this podcast. What would you tell them to do right now? What should they, and maybe additionally, what should they stop doing?
It's
right.
I want to be snarky and just tell them to update their resumes, but I won't. Look, I would say you have to be a defender and a protector of marketing. You have to elevate marketing's role. You've got to be able to aspire to a board seat. Spencer Stewart did a study, and what they released was that there are only 26 of the thousands of public company board seats are currently occupied by marketing leaders. I saw another study that said only 2.6% of board members have marketing experience at all. So that's part of the advice. I would say, certainly to deliver against those 4 pillars, But I actually will give an almost contradictory piece of advice, which is you need to oppose change in order to promote change. And what I mean by that is when a new CMO comes aboard or a new CEO comes aboard, what do? They immediately put a moratorium on all change. They in a and what they do, but that's in a bad way. So this is a proposal that actually might be about to be approved, and they say, no, put that on the back burner. We're going to now do our tour de force. We're going to visit with all of our offices around the world. We're going to do our own audit. But at the end of the day, all that happens is that they fire the agency. They fire all the people that were associated with the outgoing CEO or CMO, fruit of the poisonous tree. And then they bring in their cronies that they've worked with before, and they go on a new agency search. It makes no sense. So they'll take about 9 to 12 months just to be able to essentially weed out all of the existing baggage for them to bring in their great people. And it becomes a continuous vicious cycle. So my message is you need to not feel the urge or the instinct to change everything. Let everything take its course. Evaluate these projects and initiatives and people on their own merits as if it was day one. Then and only then you need to be able to change and change quickly and change fast. So if that makes sense, great. Maybe a different way to phrase it is you've got to be able to take one step back to move 2 steps forward. And it is very consistent. You're asking for advice. I came up with a 2x2 matrix in the book, a very simple one that says best of the old, worst of the old, best of the new, worst of the new. And the message is reject the worst of the old and reject the worst of the new, all of the nice to haves and the bright and shiny objects. Instead, keep the best of the old and embrace the best of the new. And it's a very, very simple optimization strategy, which is you take the money from the worst of the old and you invest it in the best of the new. It sounds almost oversimplified, but it is one of the easiest ways for marketers to actually take stock and account for a continuously changing, shifting landscape. So CMOs have got to recognize that there isn't a one size fits all. There's no mutually exclusive approach. The 4 pillars, yes. Embracing your heresy, yes. Filling out the canvas and being prepared to put yourself out of business, yes. Elevating marketing to defend and protect marketing, no doubt. But ultimately, the buck is going to stop with them. And so a modern day CMO has to be a chief growth officer. I truly, truly believe that. If they are not attached to the growth of the corporation, all they're doing is basically coming up with a new real-time tweet, or if we want to go back to the analogy of ships rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
I love it. Well, I would love to continue forever talking about marketing, but and we will talk a little bit more about marketing, but I want to switch gears. I love asking a series of questions to all the guests that come on just to get to know you a little bit better. The listeners know you as humans, not just as people that have a great point of view or perspective to share. So in that vein, this question that I love asking is, is there an experience of your past that defines or makes up who you are today?
I mean, I would say probably the 3 most significant things in my life, one of which is really work related to or personal. I mean, my experience at Nando's was an incredible experience because I got to, at the age of 22, 23, work closely with the founder of the company and see marketing, as Regis McKenna once said, marketing is everything. I got to experience marketing the way it should have been practiced. And for that reason, in a way, it spoiled me and tarnished me, because that's the only way I look at it now. I would say on a personal level, the first was probably loss. I lost my dad when I was very young, when I was 4 years old. And And so, my true role model, sorry, Philip Kotler, would have to be my mother, and her growing up with her as both parents at the same time, but also seeing how much she accomplished as an entrepreneur. I would say I can see now where that entrepreneurial flair comes, or love comes from. And then the third, I'd say, is immigration. I moved here 23 years ago, 22, 23 years ago, and becoming a citizen. How can you not be changed and affected when you kind of move from your homeland to a new land and become part of that culture, and embrace that culture but still kind of retain your heritage and history? So I would say probably between those three major, kind of life events, it's kind of shaped me into who I am today.
Thank you for sharing, especially about the loss of your dad and the influence of your mother. I appreciate that. I have one question about Nando's. That's a really weird segue, I realize, but I have a question about it. Do you know if they have a Nando's in London by chance?
Well, not only do they have, but I would say the UK is probably their most successful country now.
Okay.
You
I've eaten at one. The more you described it earlier, I was like, I've been in a chicken and spicy sauce place.
Well, actually, they're rolling out across America at the moment. So
Okay.
there's one on Michigan Avenue in Chicago that I bumped into, and they started kind of in the DC, Maryland area. So you can probably find out where your nearest Nando's store is.
All right. No, yeah, it was great. It was great in the food. I'm pretty sure I had it in London, but yeah, I've got to find it again for sure. Well, transitioning a little bit, what advice would you give your younger self if you were starting all over, that boy, so to speak, in South Africa?
I mean, I think there's probably two pieces of advice, and the second one I think is universal to any conversation. The first is it's never too late. So it's like this idea of saying, when you're 22, you feel like, oh, you've missed a boat. And when you're 32, you feel like you've missed a boat. And when you're 42, you go, if only I'd known then what I know now. As God made little green apples, in 10 years' time, you could be asking me the same question about today. And that person in 10 years' time is either going to say, I'm glad I took the advice, or I'm glad I went for it, or yet again, I missed the boat, in a sense. And so, we all look at it and we go, if only I'd invested in Facebook, if only I'd invested in Google, if only I'd taken that Amazon job. But there will be another wave of companies, of disruptors, of growth, of scale-ups or startups, etc. So life is so fluid, and it's just important to recognize that there is truly no finish line. The other analogy is the goalposts continue to shift. So make the most of today, right? If you think about that message on survival, which is just being able to to wake up tomorrow, gives you another shot, gives you another opportunity to say, I'm going for it. And then the other thing I would say is, and I say this to my daughter now, she's on her way going to college, but even going through the whole college application process. For me, it's all about choice. And when you have choice in your life, you are in the driver's seat. You are in control. And as you get older, that choice starts to whittle away and dwindle to the point where you don't have a choice. You can't choose to cash out. You can't choose to say, I can choose any job I want or any industry I want. You can't really go back to school. Although maybe you can, based on the first thing I said. So, but generally those people are exceptions, right? They always say the word accept is in the word exceptional. You can't be exceptional by being like everyone else. But if you kind of triangulate those two things, One is this idea of, just do it, right? Go for it.
Right.
But always try and make sure that you have choice, because the moment that you are backed in a corner and you have no alternative, that's when your fate is no longer in your hands. And I do want to emphasize that point again. I don't care whether you're 27 or 67. Just make sure you have choice.
Love it. Well, what fuels you? What keeps you going?
I mean, for me, it's like I love this stuff. I love creativity. I love innovation. I love disruption. These are not just words for me. I love breaking things and trying to put them together again even better. I love speaking, teaching, inspiring. This to me is my life force. I always say you have to embrace your life force. And if you do, then, there's that book, Love What You Do and the Rest Will Follow. So for me, when I'm conducting a workshop, when I'm training, when I'm giving a keynote speech, even this podcast right now, this is my happy place. And it drives me because, I was very connected with this idea. It's very Steve Jobsian, right? How do you make a dent on the universe? No matter how small or insignificant you think it is. That is our purpose and our mission in life, personally and professionally. That's what drives me, right? Which is to make my mark. If I can, even the flipped funnel, to know that book is in many colleges and it's part of the required reading. I actually just wrote and taught a course at West Virginia University. So I can now, at least I'm not officially a professor, but my students called me professor and I didn't correct them. So for me, when you are in when somebody comes up to me, Alan, and says, and it's happened so often, they tell me they quit their job and pursue their dream, or they change their careers from reading a book of mine or listening to me. It's scary as hell, because you don't want them to, you want them to succeed. But generally, I haven't had anyone come up to me ever to say, I did the things that you recommended and I regret them. And so if you can impact anyone's life, it is just so special and so powerful. And it just fuels me to keep going.
I love that. I love it. Well, I want to end on two, I guess, a little bit more marketing related questions. Most people like us, and us mean and include marketers, are kind of students of what's going on in the world around us, or should be. And so I'm curious if there's any brands or companies or causes that you follow or you think people should be taking notice of.
So, one of the, I'll give you a snarky response to a different question, which is, people always say, like, Joe, who's doing it right? And my answer is, why do you care? Like, because first of all, I could like literally hand you their brand strategy, on a silver platter, and you still wouldn't be able to emulate them or copy them. Yeah. So, the analogy I use is, you got to be a golfer. You've got to put your head down and you got to play every shot as if it was your only shot. Just focus on the next shot. Occasionally, you're going to hear the crowd cheering from a gallery, and maybe someone, sunk a hole in one. But don't be distracted by it. Just play your game and keep your head down. That said, the companies, and I talk about this in the book, the Apples, Amazons, Nikes, Netflixes, Starbucks, it feels like boring, the usual suspects, but I talk about why. I really go into detail as to why these companies are exceptional and have led. And then in terms of newer companies, I just love all the DTC companies. I actually had the pleasure, real pleasure, bucket list for me. Professionally, I'm very lucky. I've written a book. I've, become a lecturer or created a course, and I got to present to like 25 of the leading DTC companies in the US, and pretty much you name the company, I presented to them. And I cannot confirm if they were in the room, but one company I really love what they've built is Peloton.
Yeah.
I just, it is just so perfect and so sublime. And of course, everyone's trying to copy them now. But the real question for Peloton is, are they so far ahead that no one will catch up? And the second point would be, don't ever take that advice, because number one, it's a stationary bike, so everyone will catch up. And number two, again, the moving target. So
Right.
there's going to be a lot of imitation, but no one should ever need to go to a gym again. And if you've been following what's been happening in the news,
Soul Cycle.
with Soul Cycle and Equinox, both of which are trying to copy Peloton, they might just be losing more and more customers now because of the boycott, if you will, because of their political leanings. So contrast that with what happened with Starbucks when they had an incident where
Right.
2 African American men were arrested, and for no reason, and Starbucks basically shut down all of their stores for half a day. That's one of the heresies, right? Which is, are you prepared to leave money on the table?
Right.
And they conducted company-wide and country-wide sensitivity training. You just don't see that kind of commitment from all of these companies that suck. And so that's why I am happy to mention all of the usual suspects, with a couple of new players like Peloton too.
Yeah. Well, and actually their head of marketing, Carolyn Tish Blodgett, she's been on the show before. So early on, I think, maybe 2 years ago at this point. So I've watched them too. They're a fascinating company, and they keep innovating. They keep pushing further out from where they started too. So it's interesting to watch. Last question for you. What do you think the future of marketing is going to look like?
Well, the future of marketing. I often joke and I say, have you read that new book, The Future of Advertising, and Other Short Stories? It's actually a bunch of limericks, or haikus. No, I mean, look, the future of marketing. There will not be a future if we don't, pull up our socks and play our A plus game. If we don't elevate and attach ourselves to the strategic and business agenda of the corporation, and if we are not truly growth officers. So there's a reason why marketing has become a bit of a laughing stock, or why marketing has no seats at the boardroom, or why people just associate marketing with advertising or communications. It's because we haven't proven marketing's role and value and ability to be a game changer with all of these other P's, if you want to use the 4 P's, and other aspects that are mission critical. And so I think this is a great time to be alive. It's a great time to be a marketer, but it is also a very scary time to be a marketer. And we're going to see the winners separated from the losers based on those that are able to make bolder moves, and make sure that the company is growing for the right reasons. We see today, if you look at the whole CPG industry, the only way these companies are growing is through acquisition. That's what I call fake growth, or artificial growth, or bought growth, through M&A, through private equity companies taking over. Look at the debacle that is Kraft Heinz at the moment. What a mess! And it is a story that you could have told or foretold right at the beginning, and it will keep on happening. Sorry to say, but when private equity gets involved and zero-based budgeting, and it's all about cost cutting and efficiencies, and people are being let go, it is a broken record. And so if a marketer wants to kind of buck that trend, they've got to be able to, as I said, reframe the entire conversation. And that doesn't mean not being accountable. It's the exact opposite. They need to be accountable, but accountable to the right indicators, the right timeframes, the right constituents, for the right reasons.
I agree. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Joseph.
You're welcome. I've loved it, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends and colleagues about the show. I love to hear from listeners, and you can contact me at marketingtodaypodcast.com. There you'll also find complete show notes with links to anything we talk about on any episode. You can also search our archives. I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today. Do you struggle to get your website or app to deliver the awesome customer experience you were looking for? That's where Lightmatter comes in. Bloomberg and McCann already trust them. Visit lightmatter.com. That's LIGHTMATTER.com. And tell them Alan sent you.